I think it's time to revisit a conversation about enchantment, what enchantment is, and why it's so critical to our way forward and to us as a species. I realize when I speak about enchantment, without offering context, it can seem as if I am inviting frivolity and some form of spiritual escapism as a way of dealing with our current reality. I can assure you up front, what I just described is so far from what I mean when I say enchantment. In fact, the work that I do is actually a statement to hopefully overcome spiritual escapism, to invite a more embodied experience of life on earth, and ultimately a more embodied experience of the mythic. I'm just going to say up front, this is how I speak about enchantment and what I mean when I am speaking about this work and about embodied mythic reality. I cannot speak for anyone else who uses this word. And I imagine, in fact, part of the conflation, just like some of these other words, fairy, deity, can get extremely confused because different people mean different things when they use these terms. So I want to clarify this because this is the foundation of what I stand for and the work that I share. And in my heart of hearts, I truly feel that enchantment is a pathway to ignite the soul, enliven and enrich our lives, to root us deeply into the body and the embodied experience of what it is to be fully human on planet Earth. Enchantment is a pathway of healing. Part of stepping into re-enchantment is engaging as an integral part of the spiritual ecology, not as a watered down love and light. It's all one. It doesn't matter. There's only oneness. For oneness is only one experience of truth. But another one is stepping in to the vibrational story of the web of life. The web of life that is not this static image of arrows like they used to draw in ecology models from prey to predator and this system feeding that. And while this map can be helpful, it is also extremely sterile. And the mythic is the antidote, the remedy for sterilization. It's what brings life. It is a living, breathing conversation, a dynamic dance of forces, all engaging one another. Humans are actually the black sheep in this regard because they are the only aspect that is a part of this web but has forgotten their part in it, as if they have gone deaf and blind and can no longer hear the greater symphony. It's as if we're all tone deaf. Recently, I wanted to learn to play the harp, and I had never studied music as a child. I never played any instrument, nor did I learn how to read music. So to come to this in my adult life was one of the greatest learning challenges that I have attempted in recent years. My harp teacher would say, "Can you hear that beat?" And I also remember years ago when I was training in ballroom dancing, they wanted me to hear certain beats that I would move on. When I listen to music, I can enjoy it. But if you ask me to pick out the beat or ask me to listen for a certain pattern or a rhythm, it is very, very, very difficult. This isn't the perfect analogy. I think it illustrates that we can be immersed in our environment and immersed in the beauty of the trees and the sound of the birds outside. But can we hear the sound underneath the sound? Can we hear the rhythm or pattern and the way in which one song of creation is weaving and intertwining with another? And this is the ability that many of us have lost in our modern day. So I want to back up a little bit and mention what enchantment is not. It is not bewitchment unless you consider being spellbound by the beauty and wonder of nature bewitching. It is not about casting a spell of illusion to delude or deceive. And I'm thinking particularly in fairy tales when we speak about enchantment, often enchantresses are usually women depicted as evil, using magic or sorcery to enslave, to deceive, to manipulate. This is not the definition of enchantment that I subscribe to. And just like anything, be it money or magic, force is force. Energy is energy. And how we direct it is solely a product of the intention and the energetic makeup of the director. So whenever I speak about enchantment, I'm not talking about manipulating energy in a negative way. I'm also not talking about make-believe frivolity, dressing up like Tinkerbell with wings and flitting around and having tea parties, although I do love a good tea party. I'm not talking about existing in fantasy. I'm talking about opening from our hearts to the mythic layer that is very, very real. That is essentially the pulsing life force that feeds and sustains our world at a soul level. So when I talk about people being soul sick, I'm talking about a malnourishment at the soul and spirit level. And isn't that reflected in our physical world as well? That malnourishment. How many people are eating but are demineralized? Food and soil has less and less nutrients, mineral content than it did 30, 40 years ago through our massive farming practices and big agri. We are denaturing our soils, depleting, desecrating. So at the physical level, the earth is drying up. We are drying up, meaning that we are lacking in minerals. Some people are overweight and still malnourished, dehydrated because they can't seem to get a drop of water that's not fluoridated, malnourished because of the lack of nutrients and also the addition of poisons. I'm painting a very bleak picture here, but the vision that I hold in my heart is anything but bleak. Our physical experience is inseparable from our spiritual experience. I'm not talking about religion. I am talking about spirit, life force that infuses, that animates. So the work I do focuses on soul nourishment. And something interesting happens when we work at the spirit, energetic, and soul level. We can't help but also see changes at the physical level. Now, that is not to say that we only want to work at an energetic level, because we are human. So we have to take physical actions that match that which we are doing in the energetic. We have to take measures and also be willing to do, be, act in the physical. So for those of you who are extremely steeped in a spiritual practice, it's likely that there's an opportunity to ensure you're not spiritual bypassing in any way. An example of this is you have a challenge with a person in your life, and instead of communicating your feelings and your hurt, you pray about it. You meditate about it. You do a meditation to connect with them at the soul level. Doing this kind of practice can be very powerful. But when we're always doing that and avoiding actually having real human conversations, using our mouths, especially women, using our voices to communicate, not to convince, not to even argue, but to communicate feelings, to communicate. And for the people on the other side who are focused so much on the physical, running around, doing actions all the time, perhaps a little bit of movement to attune to the layer of spirit in your own life. What would it be like to stop and pause and reflect inward, to tune in and sit with your own feelings and see where they might be coming from? Maybe they're arising from something from long ago, and you realize that this is a pattern that has been playing out in your life with many people you interact with. And then in this case, ultimately, the work is within. The work is within. And so each of us, myself included, can swing on this pendulum one way or the other. And it's important that we always do our best to bring a little bit more integration. And I'm using that word very specifically instead of balance. I had a teacher that used to say, balance is death. Basically suggesting that this idea, this state of equilibrium, perfect equilibrium, doesn't exist. It doesn't exist in nature. It doesn't exist in reality. The only equilibrium is death, meaning that the movement has stopped. So we tend to do this in our life. We oscillate between one extreme and another. And so mythic remembrance invites us to connect into that which can nourish us at a soul level. Now, a word about the mythic. Mythic and enchantment are not the same, but they are connected. Enchantment is what happens when we connect into the mythic within us and the mythic of the earth, the mythic of life. And it's that intersection between our own personal mythic story and the greater mythic story where those connect. And there's points of connection all the time. The mythic is always seeking to journey us, to remember us home, home to ourselves, home to our hearts, home to our bodies, home to the earth. So enchantment is the experience of the mythic. And there's many pathways into the mythic. There's many pathways that we can travel that allow us to bathe in the holy well of remembrance, working animistically, allowing ourselves to listen to the earth, to pierce through the collective chatter and noise to the heart of creation, allowing that heartbeat to entrain our own, to come into a union, a communion, and in that state of receptivity, to listen, to receive. And I will say a word about fairy tales, folklore, myth, and legend. I mentioned earlier that this is not about getting lost in fantasy, nor is it about raging through countless fiction fantasy novels. Hand raise. I absolutely do love fiction fantasy. One of my favorite genres to read next to murder mystery. Yes. Hopefully that will dissolve your ideas about what it is to be spiritual. There's nothing wrong with getting lost in a fiction fantasy novel, but I want to take a moment to visit a topic about fairy tale. Old fairy tale, folk tale, legends, myth that has come from people who are living closely to the earth. The modern rational mind has categorized these as fiction, as stories, and if anything, they think of these accounts or tales as having lessons and morals embedded in them. They think of them as metaphors peppered with symbolism that we can decode and extract meaning from. But that's usually as far as most people go. And what I would suggest as part of this conversation is that myth, folktale hold truth. They hold codes of wisdom, energetic living forces are encapsulated in these tales. And these tales often hold keys to doorways into the mythic level of life. There is a reason why the bards of old spent years learning hundreds of stories, poems of the people. Stories hold power. And it's not just the power of symbolism and teaching a good lesson. Myth and folktale have the ability to hold, like treasure troves, nestled gems of wisdom. It's as if the folktales themselves are libraries, ancient libraries, but we have to know how to see and feel the doorway. I'm thinking now of the movie Labyrinth when the main character is first entering into the Goblin King's realm and the labyrinth, which is actually a maze in the movie. She is on the outer circuit of the maze and trying to find a way in. And at one point, she throws a tantrum because she can't find any way to get in. There's no doors, there's no windows, that it doesn't even seem like it turns. But when you look at the maze, which is called a labyrinth in the movie, from above, it looks like a real maze. It has all these twists and turns, but she can't get into any of those. She's just on the outskirts of it. And at one point, as she's throwing this tantrum, there's a little worm that appears in the brick wall. And he says, well, there's doorways all over. She goes, what are you talking about? And he said, well, there's one right across there. Look. And she looks across and doesn't see anything. It's a brick wall. But as she walks up to it, she can see that it's actually not just a brick wall, that it actually allows for a slippage either to the right or to the left. It's just that the openings blended in so much with the brick wall that they couldn't be seen until what happened? She stopped, she slowed down, and prior to this, she was walking and she was in that go, go, go energy. And then she started running, thinking she's going to cover a lot of ground and she's going to get there. So that was all of that very active, forceful energy. And then she stops, she has a tantrum, releases the pent-up emotion, and then she pauses and slows down. And yes, there is somebody there to guide her. And then she finds her way in. And it's the exact same thing that happens with myth, with folktale. We have to be in a certain state of consciousness in order to see the doorways. And the doorways are not a mental construct that then we sit and have a conversation about. The doorways are a living opening that you either choose to engage or not. And if you choose to engage it, you truly enter into the story. And you can now interact with the forces in that story. I'm adding this to the conversation of enchantment because in our modern day, we've relegated myths and folk tales to something that is either make-believe or to something that can be studied for its cultural and metaphorical and symbolic value. But very rarely are we approaching these stories, whether oral or written down, as gateways into the mythic. So let's recap. I've shared about what the medicine of enchantment is and possible entry points into working with the mythic in order to experience the medicine of enchantment. Those ways that I've mentioned are working with nature, land consciousness, which holds the mythic as part of its spiritual ecology. That inner landscape is braided with the mythic. Said in another way, the trees are not separate from the mycelia, nor are they separate from the spirits of nature, nor from the great dragon forces of Gaia, nor from the fairy and she forces. All of these energies exist within a connected dance of life. They are all in relationship with one another. None of them exist in a vacuum, and they don't exist in isolation. Neither do we, but we think that we do. So when we engage with the land, we are invited into an interconnected web of story and relationship. So nature and land consciousness, this is one way of stepping into the mythic and allowing the medicine and enchantment to nourish us at a soul level. And then another complementary way of working and stepping into the mythic, engaging the mythic level of life, is through fairy tale, reading myth and fairy tale. As we move into the very dark time of year, I love to have several nights a week where there's no TV, no devices, and we light a fire in the hearth. If you don't have a hearth, of course, you can light candles, which is just as lovely to bring that fire energy into the home. Dim the lights low, and bonus, if you can red light your house, even better, to remove that blue light, right, that disturbs the hormones, and read fairy tale. I actually have a book that I get out every year around this time, sits at the coffee table. It's a book about the Santas of Iceland. When my partner and I traveled to Iceland a number of years ago, we learned about the Christmas folk tale, which is connected to the Yule Lads. The Yule Lads are a group of 13 Santa Clauses who visit the children over a period of 13 nights leading up to Christmas. And each one of them, reminiscent of the 7 dwarfs of Snow White, each one of them has a certain mischievous behavior that they are linked to. They are all considered to be sons of Grilla, and she is this great hag. And not like the Santa Clauses that most of us are familiar with. These are more like trolls. And so one of them is pot licker and sausage swiper and doorway sniffer and spoon licker. So you can see that they are each named after some behavior that they are known for. Then my favorite character in these stories is the Christmas cat, sometimes called the Yule cat. And he reminds me of my cat, Miko, because he is always depicted as this black cat prowling the snowy hills at night, searching for misbehaved children. The stories, I fell in love with them, and we got this illustrated children's book while we were there in Iceland that I bring out usually around the 1st of December, that just sits on the coffee table. And at night, as the darkness sets in, I'll light candles or light the fire in the fireplace, and we'll read one of those stories each night leading up to Christmas. This is just one way that I love to bring fairy tale and folktale into my life. Speaking of tales, you might want to check out my book, Initiation, My Fairy Soul Awakening. It's a magical memoir sharing my journey of awakening into the mythic realms of fairy and soul consciousness. You can purchase it online wherever books are sold. And now, back to our show. So I would love to hear from you what your favorite folk tales and fairy tales are. What myths do you engage with regularly? And how can you work more consciously with these myths? By consciously, I really mean approaching them with heart consciousness rather than from the mind. We want to move into the childlike heart, and from that place, we engage with the story. So fairy tale is the second avenue to enter into the mythic layer of life. And those two things coupled, nature and lore, work together really beautifully to open us up to myth. Now, the third one I'm going to talk about in just a moment is the energy of fairy. Before I go there, I want to talk about what are some of the stumbling blocks that prevent us from working with the mythic and allowing ourselves to be blessed by the font of enchantment for healing, growth, and transformation. One of the biggest blocks to working with the mythic is the inability to move into heart consciousness. I keep referring to the heart, and this is truly a foundational cornerstone. Without being able to move into heart consciousness, we are not going to be able to engage the mythic. The heart speaks the language of the mythic, the language of spirit and soul. The mind only speaks the language of concrete, rational reality. So that's number one. And then the second block that I see that connects into this, why do we often have a hard time dropping into the heart? It's because of all the blockages, the toxic programming, the limiting belief patterns, and patterns of wound that exist within our energy field, blocking us from allowing truth to flow through us. This is why I work with essences. Flower essences are able to meet, address, and resolve these patterns of stuck energy, these imprints, whether they be from childhood, past lives, or ancestral based. So this is why I often detour students and clients, and instead of going straight to giving them advanced spiritual practices or working with fairy, which is going to be the third avenue I'm going to talk about, we go here because without addressing some of these very active, unhelpful patterns in our energy and in our consciousness, we are not going to be able to let go of some of the programs and infections of the matrix. So it's not about getting rid of the mind or not engaging the mind. It's about bringing the mind back into relationship with the heart. And most of us are so far from that. All right, so now having stated that, let's move to this third avenue of accessing the mythic, of receiving the medicine of enchantment. Now, I feel like the elephant in the room, which is fairy. For a long time, I started here, meaning when I was working with people, I started with fairy. I started by teaching people how to communicate with the unseen, with the realm of nature, the nature spirits, but also with the fairy people, the she. Maybe for those of you who are new here, I've just lost you because you're thinking, what is she on about? But the truth is, there is so much more to this world than meets the eye. There always has been and always will be. Fairy is more than the fairy people. Let's just talk about the etymology for a moment. Fae, destiny. That's where that word came from. It was an energetic, a place, and a being that all connected into fate, and our destiny. That in and of itself is a meditation, is a contemplation that is worth considering. So what is this energetic that is woven, and isn't that a good word to connect into destiny as well? The weave, the warp and the weft, isn't it? It's a weaving of destiny. The frequency of fairy is, to me, that great well of light, that mythic well of remembrance that reminds us of our mythic roots and of the mythic dream, that dreaming realm that the Aboriginal peoples refer to as the dream time. It's that underworld, the undercountry, the inner planes connected to the earth. But it's not just a place to go to receive wisdom. It's an energetic, like a wellspring. And what do springs do? But they emerge with water, that which nourishes, replenishes, renews, quenches thirst. And ultimately, water that comes from the deep underground wells and springs carries minerals. Water doesn't just hydrate, water nourishes. And isn't that how hydration partially comes about? We hydrate when we add that little pinch of salt to our water. Real salt, not iodized salt. Water hydrates because it is able to touch into our cellular membranes because it has the mineral content, and the mineral content then nourishes and enriches. So the waters of life, the waters of spirit, the waters of the earth, the waters of the great well depicted in so much mythology as the well of light, as the well of Urd, the well of destiny. It's the well that resides at the base of the world tree. And then there's the wells of the well maidens and the story that tells of the well maidens and how they were violated and then They abandoned the wells, and the wells dried up, and the land became a wasteland. And isn't this the story of how humanity forgot? They didn't just forget about the wells, they forgot the importance of honoring the wells and what happens when we don't honor the wells, the fairy wells, the great repositories of life force energy that surge into this world. I'm speaking at the mythic level, but remember, the mythic level holds truth. What are the nuggets of truth here? What is it telling us about our truth as a people, as a collective? And what is it inviting us into? For a long time, I've wanted to teach a program, an initiatory program about the well maiden, working with the wells and the well maiden at a mythic level. The program is mostly created. Perhaps in 2025, if there is enough interest, you can write to me and let me know if you are interested in an initiatory container experience and program connected to the well maiden and the original wound of fairy and human partnership. Now, one thing is important to state here about working with fairy is, as I mentioned, I no longer see this as a helpful first step for most people. And that is because I find it's important first to begin to lay this foundation of heart consciousness and healing and resolving woundings. And believe me, people who are steeped in spirituality and even a spiritual practice oftentimes have just as many woundings preventing them from truly moving into heart consciousness. In my 15 years of teaching fairy, a lot of the people that came to me were spiritual escapists. They did not want to deal with the physical, with the emotional, with the day-to-day. All they wanted to do was learn another technique to clear, another meditation or journey to access some inner plane wisdom. But none of that will ever land if we don't prepare the garden bed. And so I find this is a two or multi-prong approach where we till the soil of the inner landscape of ourselves, while also then slowly but surely incorporating spirit work and practices. When we are not emotionally mature enough to ethically and integrally wield these gifts, these powers, these abilities, we can fall prey to all kinds of delusions, to all kinds of unethical behavior, like unsolicited reading of people's energy fields, projecting unresolved issues and wounds. I think the key is never going so far into developing our spiritual gifts that we become top heavy, ungrounded, unrooted in the physical, with an unintegrated ego and unintegrated emotional body. Because remember, it doesn't matter how much we understand this stuff mentally, how smart we are. This has to be met in heart consciousness. And ultimately, this work has to be embodied. We're invited to allow this work to work us, to cook us, allow the mythic to cook us, allow enchantment to alchemize us from the inside out. So if what I'm saying has a resonant chord within you, I want you to have a think about what step you need to take to move toward inviting the mythic into your life. Do you need to work on heart consciousness? Foundational, critical, but oh so unsexy. If you think heart consciousness is boring, you're not doing it right. Do you perhaps need to take a healing journey? And maybe that's working with the modality of flower essences, and maybe it's something else. But whatever it is, it has to be some form of work that allows you to heal and address your woundings, to take responsibility for the programs that are running your life, to become aware of your shadow. And maybe you're at a place of stability and deep self-awareness where you are ready to engage with your land, with the land that is all around you, with the spirits of the land, connected to where you are, connected to where your ancestors are. Both are valid, both are important, but whichever point of this journey you're at, know that it is not better, it is not less, it is not higher, it is not lower. This is a non-linear journey. And we all, myself included, return to these different points. I cannot tell you how many times I return to heart consciousness and make that a focus for myself, because I realize through using technology and getting caught up in my day-to-day grind, I have found myself living more in a beta brain state. And I know that I need to balance that by coming more into alpha brain state. And so then I know that the focus is the heart. Other times, a pattern or a wounding will be triggered, and I have to do deep work. I am not in a place to learn an advanced spiritual practice or even to work with my spirit team or high magic, because I am doing inner child work or ancestral work. My focus has to go to healing rather than avoiding, using magical and spiritual practices to avoid. We have to stop that. Using magical and spiritual practices to avoid life, to avoid what is coming up. So whatever place you find yourself in, I would love to hear from you. You can send me a note, connect@diamirarose.com, to let me know what part of the journey you're in mostly right now, and what you need, what you desire in terms of what I am able to offer. If you do want to work together, which of these areas of focus would be most supportive for you? Reach out and let me know. My calendar is open once again for booking one-on-one flower essence sessions, as well as astrology sessions to help you get an overview, a guide of the energies that you may be navigating right now, and also an understanding of the cycles and where you are in these star and planetary cycles, to help us understand and plot where we are in the journey, and then what the invitations of that point on the journey are. And if you are local to the Charlottesville area, you may have noticed that I am holding monthly flower essence circles as a chance to be in community with women, to be in sacred space with women, and allow the spirit medicine of the flowers, trees, plants to support, to help you connect into your own body and your own heart wisdom. These are experiential circles, and each month, one specific essence ally is highlighted, and that is the one that we work with. I hope this has given you much to think about and contemplate around soul enchantment. Thank you so much for being here with me.